Okay, so it is 7:02 and the Town Government Study Committee meeting is now in session. We have in attendance Harriet Davis, Roger Marriage, Kirsten Alexander, Deirdre Parati, Mike Lucy, Pat Waddell, myself, ex officio members Paul Weaver, Ryan Ferrara. This meeting is being recorded and it is virtual. And all votes will be taken via roll call. That said, we'll open up to public comment. I see we do have a member of the public here. Hi, Catherine. And if anyone would like to make public comment, now is the time. Once, twice, 3 times, shoot. I have just a couple quick announcements. One, the boys soccer team and the girls soccer team have both won the Cal.
Good.
I know more about the girls soccer team. They went 12-1-2. The boys will be playing tomorrow, Friday, 2 o'clock at the high school, and the girls are scheduled to play Sunday at 1 p.m. Right now it's at the high school, but that could be moved to a better field. The turf committee has started meeting and we've got a timeline in place. Just something we want to publicize that so people know that there is work being done. It does not pertain to this committee. And I guess one other thing, I went to both the FinCom and the board, the select board last night to discuss what Susan Malin had brought up at our public forum, just to elaborate on, let them know as a private citizen, not as chair of this committee, that the town could potentially be on the hook for benefits for all elected officials who receive a stipend. And we can get more into that when we get to the public forum piece. I don't have minutes from the public forum, but did everyone review the minutes from our 10-7 meeting?
Yes, I move that we accept the minutes of the October 7th meeting as presented.
Second.
Excellent. Harriet?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Kirsten?
Yes.
Deirdre?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Patrick Roll, yes as well. All right, good. Public survey responses. I have put the public survey out on the website. I'm going to share my screen right now. Pull this up.
You see the share screen, Patrick? Yeah.
Yep,
Okay, good,
I do.
good.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
Mhm.
Yes.
So we got 34 responses. One person didn't say they were from Wenham. One person said they were not from Wenham, but I think it might have been a mistake. But anyway, first question, 7 people in favor of 3-member board, 23 people, 5-member board, 4 people don't think it'll make a difference.
Patrick, sorry to interrupt you, but just if you recall, before the forum, did we have 32 responses? Do you remember?
I believe it was 32. I think I can check later when the responses came in, but I think it was 32.
So most of the responses predate.
Yes.
Okay. Proceed.
From there, we go into the please share any thoughts. I encourage you all to go in and read all these. Most people did have thoughts on this. Second, multiple choices. Do you think boards and committees would benefit from a 5-member select board or a 3-member select board? Again, we're running largely in favor of 5, 20-4, with 8 don't think it'll make a difference and 2 no opinions. So running 5-1. Again, we got a lot of comments there. And then I believe that more involvement by the select board and boards and committees would be beneficial. Agree and strongly agree is 20. 10 with don't agree or disagree. And then 3 say disagree and 1 strongly disagree. So again, here we're running 20 saying 5 and 4 saying that it would not be beneficial. Again, lots of responses. And then do you believe a 3-member or 5-member select board would be better able to fill open seat appointments on boards and committees? Running strongly in favor, 17-3 in favor of a 5-member board with a strong showing, and I don't think it will make a difference. Thoughts? A lot of people are willing to serve. 17 are willing to serve, only 5 said no, and 11 not sure. And then, are you a Wenham resident? 1 person said no, 32 said yes, and 1 did not respond. But I believe you can look at individual responses, and I think the person who said no actually said they served on a board or committee in Wenham. So I don't know if it was a mistake or, but it's only 1 vote, so it doesn't really impact the survey much. Right, let's stop this screen share. Any comments on the public survey?
Seems pretty consistent with the other surveys. I don't remember the exact percentage, but
I can
The
pull that
only-
one up as well.
The only question that I have on any of our surveys is we don't ask, I don't believe, we've asked the respondent to identify things about himself. Age, length of service in the town, how knowledgeable are you? So you see, we have all this data, but we have nothing to base it on. Just people who haphazardly decided to take a survey. And I'm very reluctant to base any decisions on these people. We don't know who they are. They could all be the same person, but we don't, it's not scientific enough is what I'm saying to have a lot of validity.
Yep.
That's my,
I agree, but as Kirsten said, it does kind of match what we saw from our boards and committees, which are typically.
but that's the same thing. We still don't know very much about those people. In terms of not their names and addresses, anything of the sort, but who are they? What's their experience? How long they lived in town and so forth. I just think that we need to have more of that information. I know a whole lot of people who've told me that they haven't responded, people who are very strongly against going to 5. So their voices have only been heard verbally to some of us. But I can't base decisions on an unscientific survey. That's all I'm saying.
I'm having my concern.
I had my hand up first, actually. Sorry, but if we're going to speak in turn, we didn't set it up as a scientific survey. So I think that's one issue. And the way we set it up is what we got. The public survey is a small response rate relative to the number of people in town. So I do think that there's not a whole lot that can be derived from that. But I do think the boards, committees, and employee survey is very different. The response rate was actually pretty good. That's a known and very specific population that we decided to survey. And that data actually is valid, I think, given the questions that we asked and people answered them. And it's not 100% response, but you really rarely ever get 100% response rate. So I don't think it's something that you can just, or we as a committee can completely disregard. the public will have their voice and their vote when it comes to town meeting, if that's where it goes.
Mhm.
And ultimately, everyone will have their say.
Yeah, I just somewhat similar to Harriet's thing. My issue with the popular surveys, let's call them, is the fact that this is a subject which there's extensive information and experience in all the other towns and reports. You recall at the beginning of this exercise, I had prepared a pros and cons list and suggested that in setting up the interviews, it would be useful for the people to know what is known, generally speaking, in town governance in Massachusetts about the issues presented one way and another between 3 and 5. Deirdre basically objected to that. And so all of these questions have been asked people who have no necessary background at all and no, by and large, I think, no access to the deep tradition of experience that has been reported from other places. So I think that's my concern with this. I mean, so to Deirdre's point is simply one set of data. It's man on the street data. But it seems to me they're opining or reacting without fully understanding all of the implications that are there. But anyway, that's just my view.
I'm going to go to Kirsten.
I think it's important to know what goes on in other places, but we've had a very particular situation in Wenham that has not happened in any other town over the last 2 years that people have paid a lot of attention to. I don't think the average townsperson in Wenham is unaware of what the implications of a 3-person versus a 5-person board are, because we've seen it. So, yes, the sample size for the general population is small. I think that the number of people who feel qualified to answer it might be somewhat small, and many of them already took the boards and committee survey. The people who are most invested and knowledgeable about the town probably already did that. Harriet, if you know people that didn't take the survey but shared their opinions, it would have been great to have them take the survey, because we can't base our decisions on what people are telling you. I mean, you can, but the rest of us can't. It's definitely not scientific, because and I'm sad if they knew that there was a survey and refused to take it for some reason. That I think it has been really helpful for me to see what people said in general.
Deirdre, back to you.
I think it's quite a leap to assume that these people who are answering the surveys don't have knowledge and understanding. I just don't see how we can know that or assess that. And I do think that we constructed the other data collection to be asking those questions of people who were knowledgeable and had the history. We had former select people, we had former town administrators, we have the very people who fill out our town government boards and committees and our town employees. And that population and also towns that have undergone this transition. So these are all knowledgeable people. So I actually think, though I would have preferred that we had more data than we do, that it's pretty informative. It's not scientific, but we did not set up a scientific study.
And I will add that I believe through all of the groups that we have reached out to, the responses have been fairly consistent. The ratios of 3 to 5 are consistent across the public survey, the boards and committees, the TAs, the other select boards. It's coming in. Every constituency is coming in favor of 5. Go ahead, Roger.
One other thing that was mentioned was that we didn't deliver to the people with whom we were speaking the pros and cons. And I just want to make the point that I believe that was a considered deliberate choice by this committee, that we didn't want those pros and cons affecting the responses we were getting, the narrative responses we were getting from the groups of interviewees that Deirdre just mentioned. And really that it is our job as a committee to consider those pros and cons in light of the information gathered and make a recommendation to the town or the select board and then potentially the town based on whatever pros and cons we see, whether it's pros and cons that other towns have assembled or ones that we identified through our information gathering.
And there are multiple versions of pros and cons that are available in our website. I know I've compiled a list and some other people have compiled lists. So it's not that the information was not available. Anyway, I'm going to move on to discussing the public forum. I just want, so this is the conversation that Harriet alluded to. So I did go to the select board last night and to the FinCom last night, just to let them, as a private citizen, not as the chair, to let them know that it was discovered in MGL Chapter 32B, Section 2, that any elected public official that receives compensation is eligible for benefits regardless of the hours worked. So I've gone back through and we have from the website, there's a list of elected officials. And I went back through the budget and tried to pull out any stipends. For Mr. Moderator, you get $50, but it's listed as an expense and I don't know what that is. So I don't know if it's compensation. So I don't know if you're eligible for benefits.
I would say, going back to my time, that was money that was put in. There was a stipend, I think, at one point in time. I asked that it be removed, and they left in the $50 in order to pay for my dinner ticket at the Mass Moderators Association annual meeting, which I never charged. I never charged anything against the $50 either. It all went back in the general fund. So I think it's not compensation.
And I'll say I have not to date since my election taken any part of that $50 and don't presently intend to, whether it's for expenses along the lines of what Paul just mentioned or otherwise.
Other elected officials that I found that did receive compensation: town clerk, which is a full-time position, the select board, and the water commissioners. The water commissioners, the chair receives $2 and the other two commissioners receive $1. That's compensation and that makes them eligible for benefits. So I had told, and Susan Malin brought this up, I wanted to, and I received an email from the chair of the FinCom. I wanted to address it with them. And our purview is the scope of our study is fairly narrow. You know, will the town be better served by 3 or 5? This could be a corollary, but and it could be noted in our report. I, as a public citizen, and I told both boards this, that I do intend on raising this issue on the floor of town meeting. I am, at this point, I'm not planning on making a motion to zero out the stipends, but I think the townspeople need to know that they can be on the hook for $27,000 per elected official that receives a stipend. So there's potentially 7 people that could receive $27,000 in benefits from the town. I just wanted to discuss, because the chair of the FinCom said, oh, this would be something the Town Government Study Committee can address. And that would not be really the case. Kirsten?
I would suggest, if nobody's done it already, that we look at what the implications would be if the stipends went away for everyone, for someone who, say, has 18 years of state work and is now a Board of Select person, and the extra 3 years would count towards their retirement. I don't know if we pay into that at all. I mean, obviously paying health insurance would be enormously expensive, but I don't know if the retirement component is one that maybe that's why this was, it seems to me there's probably some reason why this law was put in place, and retirement may have some part of it. So I would hate for someone to, work as a select board member very long and hard, but not have it count towards retirement if that's an issue. So I just think somebody needs to study what the full implications are.
Mhm.
And if anyone is counting this service towards retirement.
Patrick, if I could, I don't think that would be pertinent in this case, Kirsten. I think it is specific to healthcare, and retirement connects with hours of work, and how many hours you're regularly working, full-time, part-time. So if we're talking about employees who are working under 20 hours a week, they wouldn't normally be eligible for healthcare benefits. But what's unusual about this provision is that it allows for it. So I don't think that is a particular concern in this instance, but certainly healthcare would be. So just.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And if I might just say, Ryan, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that a town can simply opt out of eligibility for benefits. And we could still do stipends and simply pass a bylaw, or town council will figure out how to do it. It simply says not. I mean, it's obviously been the tradition not to provide those benefits to anybody at any time that I can remember over my long tenure. So, I mean, it seems to me, if it's critical to anyone's vote on whether or not to go to 5, that they either are or are not eligible, then it seems to me that does couple. And certainly from a that warrant construction point of view, there are ways to deal with, if we were trying to interconnect things, we'd say passage of a change to 5 is only effective upon a subsequent article being passed, which terminates any or opts out of those benefit rights. So, I mean, you can link these two things together so the townspeople make a conscious decision on it. But I think if it seems to me it's relevant to the discussion whether it's $30,000 a person or $2,000 a person. So I mean, it seems to me we sort of need to take a position on, we're in favor of 5 no matter how much it costs, or we're in favor of 5 but only if it doesn't cost $27,000 a person.
Well, I don't think the two issues are linked. I really don't. I think this is an issue that most people don't know about. And yes, there are 3 ways that at least 3 ways that this could be rectified. This could be a policy change through a public hearing and select board. They could do it themselves. It could be a bylaw change, so that would go through town meeting. And it could be either a citizen's petition, or it could just be on the floor of town meeting. The floor of town meeting is the easiest way, right? Well, it's the easiest way to bring the issue to the public. It is not the easiest way to eliminate. It may be very contentious, but.
Patrick, I do know, and I'm talking 25 years ago, my mother did get health care when she served as a selectman. And it was then when she retired, they decided to, by a policy decision, they would not pay retiree health care. And I do believe that they also said no sitting selectman could get it. And I think Joe Younger was quite upset by that. My question is, I'm quite convinced that there were decisions made back in probably 1990. Do these provisions have a time frame? Do they expire? Are they still on our books and we don't know it?
I have not seen it in our bylaws or policies. This is a policy change, does not have to go to town meeting. It can be done completely outside town meeting. It's the easiest to enact. It's also the easiest to reverse. But I don't know of anything that this could be done, within 3 weeks, probably. This could be a non-issue in 3 weeks, but the select board would have to take it up.
My question is, I believe that the policy was changed maybe 30 years ago. And is that still in effect? You're saying you don't think so because you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I have not seen it. I've saw, no one has brought it to my attention, and I've raised this to several groups. No one has brought it to my attention that we have a policy on the books that says an elected official who does not work over 20 hours can take benefits. I haven't seen anything in the bylaws.
It was the
I'd be happy to,
pre-digital.
yeah, I'd be happy to look into that. I
Good.
mean, I don't, Harry, I wouldn't think that there would be any sunset provision with that, but certainly that's something to follow up with, that I could follow up
Who
with.
knows? I'm talking 1990-ish. And
Ish, okay.
pre-digital age, papers go astray, who knows?
Right. But well, it's maybe something worth looking at. So no, I can follow up with Trudy on that. So
Good.
Sure.
Yep.
Ryan, if this was done by bylaw, it should have been rolled up in the Town Government Study Committee and be reflected in the general code
Yeah.
ordinance
Mhm.
that we have now. If it was just a selectman vote decision, then the recourse would have to be to the minutes
Right.
of those
Right.
meetings.
So I think it would be, Paul, like right through the minutes is probably where we'd have to look. It's be a fairly extensive haystack.
Big
for
pain in
us
the
to-
ass.
Yeah.
Well, I know we just did a policy review as well, so it really should be an up-to-date policy, so, we can point to it. Are there other points, people, Mike?
With respect to whether or not people get benefits or not, it's not part of our charge. We'll go for 3, go for 5. They will be eligible for whatever is on the books. And there we are. I guess the reason you want to know is that particularly high expense elements like healthcare and or retirement, my God, that gets to be big numbers, and therefore it could have an influence on an individual's vote of 3 versus 5. So it comes in the back door. It's not part of our charge, but it's an item I guess we have to take account of.
Because the primary question I think people have around town is, what's this going to, if we go to 5, what's it going to cost?
Right.
And the FinCom was very interested that they may have not accounted for a potential liability. And Susan Malin raised the fact that because it is a potential liability, it should be on the books.
Yeah, well, that should be looked into by the appropriate authorities.
Yes. Other issues people would like to raise about the public forum? Obviously, go ahead, Roger.
I'll say, although attendance was still not robust, I was happy to see it doubled from our first public session. I just want to reiterate that I appreciated the comments and questions from the 2 attendees who offered them. Unfortunately, my questions did not seem to spur all that much more discussion, but it was, it was helpful, it was informative. We had the challenge of going up against a school committee meeting, which might have impacted our turnout. But overall, I thought it served the purpose that we were hoping it would.
And Kirsten?
I just wanted to say I was surprised to see us on the cover of the Chronicle too. The 3 to 5 meeting made the front page. And
They have no news. There's nothing else to report.
well,
Today's
it's
Chronicle
funny
was
because
Eminently,
the Hamilton town meeting got a tiny paragraph at the very end, and we were like
Everything
on
passed.
2 pages. So I will drop the link in the chat for anyone who wants to see it.
Thank you. Yeah, most public forums, public hearings I've been involved with get very little, if not zero comment. So it was nice to have people engaged. I think the last public hearing that I saw, the engagement was probably for the pool, which was several years ago. Okay, next up is the KP Law memo. I don't know if everyone has read it. I sent it to DLS, Division of Local Services at the state, and they agreed. To me, this seems like almost a CYA. If you're asked, no offense to the attorneys present here tonight, but when you ask for something in writing, sometimes the answer changes.
I don't know what you were talking about. A CYA? I've never heard of this term in my 11 going on 12 years of legal practice.
Go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to say, I mean, I agree with you to a certain extent. I understand all the good and all the bad about KNP. The reason we're with them, in my view, why I recommended that when I retired, was because you're going to find out any possible argument is going to be available through their law firm, both sides, and then we can position it where we want to be. So yes, there's all these nitty gritty stuff. You ask Lauren a simple question, you will get a complex answer every time. And it's all very correct and very thorough, good lawyerly work. But for purposes of this committee, I think you can easily put on one-page PowerPoint what has to happen if the town votes to change the size of the board. I took a hand at drafting it, and I ended up with, I think, 4 or 5 bullets, that cover everything. Because I think it's unnecessary to talk about all of the individual steps that the drafts person, which is Lauren, is going to go through to produce the thing. There's going to be a document, and it has to be passed at town meeting, and it has to go to the legislature and so forth and so on. So it's pretty simple. I'm happy to circulate that if you think that would be helpful, because I would be inclined to use that as the basis of this recommendation can be accomplished by doing the following 5 things. If somebody wants to dive more into it, we can pull out the KNP memo and bore them to death.
I think the most pertinent piece that I pulled from it was they initially said we did not have to go to a ballot vote. And the memo says you should go to a ballot vote, which could potentially push things off another year, potentially. Or you could make, if we vote to go to 5, you could have a ballot question that says, are you in favor of 3 to 5, and then have a slate of candidates. If the question fails, then the candidates don't matter. But that initially, Lauren had said verbally that we don't need a ballot vote. So this says, you probably should go to the ballot, and DLS confirmed that they believe the best course is a town meeting vote and then a ballot vote. So again, potentially lengthens the timeline could potentially lengthen it by a year.
Why a year, Patrick? Why couldn't it just be a special election 3 months later?
I hadn't thought of that. I guess it could be.
Or a week
Prop
later.
2.5 override type deal.
Yeah, but like the week after town meeting, we have votes on certain stuff. Do it then.
I guess it could be. Yeah.
I would say, just if I could, I would say that's one thing to check in on again with them, because depending on the state law, there was an instance in my prior community where there was a question about when something went on the ballot, potentially to change the town clerk from elected to appointed. There was a requirement that there be a certain window of days prior to that going on the annual ballot, well, or before it could go to an election. Now, it could be a special election, but there may need to still be a window of time there. So
I
just
think there
one
is.
caveat.
Wasn't
And
there,
I-
Paul, in the thing that was sent us? What was that, 64 days?
64 days, I think, yeah.
So that's
and the
more
oth-
than a week, Mike.
And the other piece to continue to consider is we've lost a long-term representative. We're going to get
Right.
a new rep, and then we're going to be broken in half. So we're not going to have a strong voice on the Hill to advocate for us potentially. So a ballot vote is an extra vote of confidence potentially. Roger?
One potential flip side to that view is where the town is being proposed to be split in half for state representation, is that the town would arguably have 2 representatives. So, there's always a silver lining, right?
Yes, all right. People ready for our straw poll? Straw polls. So the first straw poll would be, are you in favor of 3 versus 5? So let's start with the vote in favor of 5.
I'm gonna make Patrick, I'm gonna make a motion that we reverse the order of the straw polls.
Oh, okay, yes, okay, that's good.
If anyone wants to hear why, I'm happy to explain, but. So I'm seeing Kirsten nod her head. So I think the question of whether the issue goes to town meeting, whether we as a committee are recommending the issue go to town meeting, is a sort of prefatory question to our substantive recommendation. And therefore, it would make sense for us to take the straw poll of this group as to whether we even think the issue should go to town meeting before doing a straw poll on our substantive views.
Kirsten?
So if that's a motion, do we have to vote on the motion?
It has not
Or is
been,
it discussion? Okay.
it has not been seconded.
I mean, for me, if our recommendation is to stick with 3, then I don't know why we would go to town meeting. So I'd probably still rather vote 3 or 5 first. Unless there's a reason to go to town meeting if we aren't making that recommendation. If we're saying stay the same, why would we go to town meeting?
I would say because there was a overwhelming vote at the special election to study this issue. We heard at our public forum, at least one person who was voting for that did so because they wanted to see the change, not because they wanted to see a study done. So even if we were unanimously recommending stay the same, I think it is an issue that the town has called to be put before it and thus would still warrant a warrant article.
Fair point.
And I would add to that, the surveys that we've gathered, the research that we've done is very in favor of 5. So even if I were against it, I may be in favor of sending it to town meeting, that they should have a voice regardless of my feelings. Do I have a second to take the second vote, the recommend to ATM before the 3 to 5?
Second.
Second. Harriet? So this is a vote to first take a straw poll on whether to recommend the vote to town meeting. And again, this is just a straw poll. This is not.
No, I'm against it.
You're against. Roger?
Yes.
Kirsten?
Yes.
Deirdre?
Yes.
Mike?
I don't understand what we're voting on.
We're voting, this is a straw poll as to whether the question of 3 to 5 should go to town meeting.
Patrick, just to
So
clarify,
that's a decision.
the motion itself is not a straw poll. The motion is simply on the
Oh,
order
the
of
order.
conducting the straw polls.
Oh, I'm sorry. So do we take the recommend to town meeting question before we take the 3 to 5 question?
Right, a yes vote would be for that.
Help me, I'm still not getting it.
Yeah.
Okay, I will help
Okay.
you. I'm going to help you because I'm going to vote yes. And therefore, we have 4 yeses. 1 no.
Mike, a yes is we do so there are 2 straw polls that we're going to be doing tonight. One is, do we as a committee recommend the issue go to town meeting? The second is, do we as a committee recommend 3 or 5? And again, straw polls, we're just
Okay.
getting the sense of the
On
room.
the first question, who are we to say whether it goes to town meeting? That's a decision for the select board. Our job is to do our report to the select board, and they will take it from there. That's my understanding.
Yes, but I think the select board will, if we recommend the issue not go to town meeting, the select board will take that into consideration.
And the only way we would recommend it not go to town meeting is if 3 stands. Because if you want 5, you got to go and change it. The status quo doesn't change. 3 would stand on its own. No need for any action at all. Okay, so because I think it's the role of the selectmen to decide in February what they want to do, I'm a no on that switch.
Okay. So the vote is 4-2. So we will take up the question to recommend to town meeting first. So if people want to offer their vote, instead of me calling on people, I would be happy to take them. Or I can call on people. Deirdre,
Yes.
Harriet,
What's the question?
the question on the table is, do we recommend that a vote go to town meeting to consider 3 to 5?
No,
Kirsten,
Yes.
Mike,
No.
Roger,
Yes,
and I am a yes as well. So on the straw poll, we have a vote of 4-2 to recommend to go to town meeting. Okay, on the next question, this is from 3 to 5. Whether you are in favor of basically 5 or 3 members of the select board. I'll reverse the order from the last vote. I am a 5. Roger,
and this is non-binding straw poll.
just a straw poll.
At this point in time, I am abstaining in my role as town moderator. This is an issue that may be put on the floor of town meeting, unless I should not be opining unless necessary to break a tie. So I am an abstention at this point.
Okay,
Happy to continue, I'm going to continue with the process. Happy to work on the reports as needed, offer my thoughts. I think there's pros and cons to both sides. But on a vote, it's an abstention at this point.
okay. Mike,
While I'm trying to keep an open mind until we deliberate and see the validity of pros and cons and then vote, but I understand you're doing this now. If I was sitting here right now without any further knowledge, I would retain 3. I'm a 3.
Kirsten,
I think looking at the data, majority people in 5.
you're a 5?
Yeah.
Okay. Harriet,
3.
3. And Deirdre.
5.
Paul, if you would like to opine, I know you're an ex officio member, but if you'd like to opine, you're more than welcome.
I don't think, I mean, I've tried to be provide, pro and con information that goes along. I have personal opinions about it, which I sort of alluded to earlier. So I'm not sure I need to try to muddy the water of the voters. I'm aware of the fact, and I think you referred to this, Patrick, is that the board, to some degree, anticipated not a unanimous thing, and majority and minority reports. And I think my issue, and I'm sort of going to jump into Roger's thing. I some time ago, when I saw the difference between what I was seeing from a very experienced insiders and what I was seeing from a broader populace on this, is that the most important thing is how it's presented to the voters. And that is where I feel like the pro and con, or some basis, should be provided to put the thing in context. This is in much the way that happens with ballot initiatives in Massachusetts elections. You have a little blurb that this is what it is, this is what it does, and you have these arguments in favor and these arguments against, or whatever. So I think that that's the right way to set it up for the voters, because most of them have not watched all our meetings. And to my point is, I think, or shall we say, my philosophy as moderator always was the fact that I got a lot of clean slates walking in and sitting down. And they were open-minded and interested in, a well-presented and well-supported argument, and then we're prepared to make their vote. And so I always worked very hard to make sure the whole context was there. The reason nowadays the warrant articles come with commentary, that was something it took me 10 years to get the board to agree to do that. But that was to say, look, the board deals with this stuff all day, every day, and so forth and so on. These people show up once a year, and they need a little bit of a briefing. Be put in some context. And so my main concern on this one is, and certainly the data collected has indicated, a broad spectrum of views. And I think, I thought from the very beginning that this was a case of which the issues are fairly obvious. And it's a question of what each individual voter thinks is more or less important in Wenham. Some people will care a lot about the open meeting law piece. Some people will care about the money. Some people will care, so and you can weight things, in different ways to come out how you want to come out. So that's why my main concern right now is just setting an objective frame of reference around this, regardless of what this committee recommends, either minority, and what the Board of Selectmen, because the Board of Selectmen can put it on the warrant and then recommend against it, for example. So they're going to have their own vote today, their own straw poll today. So we'll see. So anyway, no, I think it's not my place really to have a vote, since I don't have a vote. But thank you for asking me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, yeah, so the straw poll has been taken, and we are 3-2 with an abstention, which is fine. And
also not, Patrick, and not present.
they're not present.
Dave is
Yeah.
not here, and it could be a tie if he were a 3, and it's a majority for the 5 if he's a 5.
So please forgive me. Dave did send me an email earlier, and he did indicate his preference, and his preference was 5, or is 5. And thank you for reminding me. I do have that email. But he's not here to vote, so it's more hearsay. So now we come to the initiation of the deliberation. We've got a sense of the committee. I've put together my own pros and cons for both 3 and 5, and have put the document out there. I could start off the deliberation or stay silent and let others take over. Whatever is preferred.
So I think we have the list of pros and cons that came from the research questions. I think it's helpful if people add to those lists, pros and cons, both things that are not already represented from the data that we collected. So other points that we all have, one way or the other.
and looking through my list, things that were not in the what we've collected is diminish the use of the rule of necessity, which we saw invoked recently. We really don't want to ever have to do that, because it is a rule of necessity. Less dependence on retirees. We're seeing most of our select board members over the past 13 years have been retirees. Greater stability.
Not exactly true. Jack Wilhelm wasn't, John Clemenza wasn't, Molly Martins wasn't, Patrick Wilson, Ken Whitaker. I think we've had a lot of recent people who were full-time workers.
Now that you say it, I'm thinking back on those, yeah. A greater stability potentially.
Diane Bucco is a worker.
Yep.
Even on our current board. So I don't think that's a good argument to put forth, okay?
Yep.
Well, but is it proportionate to the town? No.
I do remember Don Costin saying years ago, mind you, he died in 13, so it's a little dated, but he said, there is a time commitment that one has to be willing to make. And some people who are working full-time may not have that. I think that's probably, Patrick, what you were getting at.
On the con side, you get single issue potential to get single issue candidates. You waste staff time, more members dropping by town hall. Although I've seen the argument the other way.
Mhm.
Factions will still form with 5 and with 3.
Would we be better served by circulating a 2 or 3 page list of these pros and cons and bringing it to the table at our next meeting and following through, as opposed, we're going to have a lot of pregnant pauses here as everybody just thinks, oh, well, what's another pro? Let me think. And then somebody else trips over that one. You know, why don't we just call the ball, circulate your draft, Patrick, and we'll all chew on that at the next meeting.
Well, I will say this
Well-
draft has been out there for about 3 weeks now, so it
Yeah,
has
but-
been shared.
Well, that's not my point is that it's never been directed in the agenda. In preparation for November 4th, read what Patrick posted.
No,
We
We don't
did
do
say
that.
that last
It has-
time.
It has been on the agenda for everyone to
Yes.
come up with their own pros and cons, and that's what I did. And I will
Okay.
not, I'm not sending documents unless they are, the memo from KP. The drive is out there for everyone to share and to access.
Okay,
So documents are there. The pros and cons that you sent are there as well. The draft report is there as well. Whatever I get, I tended to put on the
sure,
website.
sure.
So,
No, I get that. I just wanted to find a path where we're just not chewing all the time.
yeah. Yeah, this was supposed to be the initiation of the deliberation. And I figured we would be prepared to move forward. Go ahead, Kirsten.
So one of the things that I've thought about a lot, particularly since 2 elections ago, when Catherine won, is that we had 3 people running for the seat. One was a 21-year-old, I think. One was a dad whose kids had just graduated from high school. And then one was a returning select board member. And obviously the returning select board member got elected, but I think had there been more seats available, it would have been compelling to have someone in who's young and brings that perspective, or who is a parent who's freshly out of the schools and has a lot of thought about that and that transition point. So, I like, I think with 5, you can take risks with people, rather than picking someone who's been in town for 25 years and like has been on every single board. You can bring in some different voices. And I think that's a really valuable thing to have in our democracy.
Kirsten, I take the other side completely and say the Board of Selectmen, or Select Board, if you want to call it, is not an entry-level position. It's not a training position. We need well-versed, experienced people who have worked their way up, who know the town. And I completely disagree with what you're saying. There are other ways that new people, young people can be involved. Other committees they can serve on, just not the select board.
Well, with all due respect, I mean, people have experience from all parts of lives. They may have been on a select board somewhere else, and they bring amazing experience to this town. I mean, someone who just went through our public schools has a different perspective and a different bunch of experience. They may have had a lot of experience for their age. I mean, other towns have mayors who are 25 years old. I don't think age is something
And they
that
send them to
is a
jail
restriction.
too, in Fall River or wherever.
Well, I didn't vote for that guy, but that it's a thing. But I certainly don't think we should be discriminating against people because of age or because they haven't had 40 years of experience in one town. I think fresh perspectives and experience from outside can be extremely valuable as well. But certainly people should try to be on other boards and get some town experience. I always recommend that to people, not going straight for the Board of Select.
My suggestion is that it's not a matter of discrimination or blocking people. The wisdom of the Wenham voters will take care of who fills those seats. Leave it at that. I've got an alternative to your document, Patrick. Just working the view behind a 3 vote. Wenham will be better served retaining a 3-member select board. 1, it's hard enough to fill the seats as it is. A 3-person board has served Wenham's needs for over 300 years. It's more efficient with shorter meetings. A 3-person board provides a good perspective on the issues without an overburdened, drawn-out process. The blah, blah, blah goes on to 10 o'clock. No, thank you. More competitive races for 3 seats yields more qualified candidates. A 3-person board costs less. It's easier to manage open meeting law requirements. And finally, the primary goal is informed and efficient decision-making regarding town policies that then the town administrator carries out. A 3-person board works best to achieve that result. So there's my 1-page minority report already drafted.
I agree. I will second that, Mike. Well said.
Mike,
And by the way, if you read the fine print on our charge, the majority opinion can be no longer than 2 pages. Thank you very much.
So Mike, I do question the 300 years because I went through the 2 books on the history of Wenham, and never did I see the mention of the number of select board members.
Mm-hmm.
And I did go to town hall and talk to Trudy, and she pulled out some of the books. And in order to make that statement, you really have to, she's got books back to the early 1900s.
Okay.
You really have to go through those and see who was on the boards and count noses. Because I have also heard someone told me that at one point we had 6 members of the select board. remember, the select board used to come from the church. First Church was our seat of government. So if you had an influential person move into town that wanted to be on the board, chances are they could find a seat.
Mhm.
Patrick, I'm going to take issue with that. My, a great uncle was a deacon at the Baptist church, and he was a selectman for, I don't know, 30 years. He was an assessor for a great number of years. There were, Uncle Lewis Dodge was also a member of the Baptist church. He was on the finance committee for 35 years. No, it hasn't always been the First Church, not in the last, say, 100 years.
So
I
I revised my statement because I'm quite comfortable saying for the last 70 years, the last 100 years,
For the
300
last
may be
100
a
years would be
300
fine.
may be a reach, but I'll be damned if we're going to spend 2 weeks in the basement of town hall trying to find out.
yeah. So
I've got
So
all
town-
the town reports in my attic. I'll look for some of those too.
town,
But I'm
town hall,
bored. That will
town
never
hall,
happen.
How about decades?
Right.
Town hall was built in 1850, 1853. That's when it became the seat of government.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it was the meeting house, the
Right.
3 meeting houses of First Church.
My word, Patrick, you are really having fun with this job.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, that's great.
I searched those 2 books for mention of the select boards, and it was very scant mention. And never mentioned who the select board members were. I know who the pastors were, Pastor Fisk, and
Yeah.
Mather, and Roger.
Anyway,
I just have a question from Mike. You mentioned or suggested that the charge puts page limits on the reports.
oh, I was joking.
That was a
Okay,
joke.
didn't know. I wasn't sure.
But I mean, as close to 2 instead of 200 would be useful.
If I may just make this observation, I think there are lots of good arguments for 5. Certainly in the abstract and even in the case of Wenham, I think it's a close case either way. And as I say, I think it's based on how people weight the individual factors. But the rule of necessity argument, in my view, is I don't know. I don't like that argument because, and I was a little bit involved. Had John Clemenzi's situation and the necessary resignation to resolve that been communicated to Jack before he actually resigned and left town, he would have stayed. I mean, he's told me
That's
that.
right. He
So
would've.
he had he known that was happening. I don't know, as between the 3 people on the board at the time, I don't know who knew what when, but Jack was in the process of leaving town. And, you know, so he submitted his resignation, you know, in a silo, as it were, would have retracted it or would have not delivered it in the first place had he been aware that he would left the town high and dry without a working quorum. So that I think that these circumstances are quite unprecedented, and that one was the nail in the coffin, so to speak, but was simply the result of bad communication. And you can blame whoever you want for that, but anyway, just that's the thing that's bothered me all along, is that everyone is saying because this situation arose and we had to suffer through with it for a few months. Anyway, okay, go ahead.
I think it's less about, I mean, I think the fact that we did have 1 is an issue because we wouldn't have been hamstrung if we had had 5. But that doesn't change the fact that the rule of necessity had to be invoked because 2 of our select board members had conflicts of interest and were allowed to still participate and adjudicate in a situation where they both had a conflict of interest. That's a huge problem. They also both were involved in not releasing minutes to the public and obfuscating what was going on the select board for approximately a year. And I think when you experience problems like that, this was not just, they didn't communicate about their resignations. This was at least 1 year of really significant issues. And I would say malfeasant behavior that was going on that was not handled well. And if there had been 5, we would have been in a better position to have dealt with that series of issues. And I think when you experience problems of that magnitude, you do not just sit by and say, well, it worked fine for 300 years, so what? It's a one-off. No, you change the structure of the system to ensure that that problem does not happen again. And that's where I think we have a responsibility to change the structure of our town government to ensure that we do not experience those problems again. They should not have happened the first time, but they certainly should not be allowed to happen a second time. And with 2 members who are colluding in some fashion, there is 1 member who can then do nothing about that. And that situation is remedied with 5 people.
And it was known what the offense was by Mr. Clemenza. And I think most sane people would say the correct course of action for him was to resign. So it was not an unknown. It was a question of when and not if. It should have been a question of when. And I had a conversation with John 1 year prior to him actually resigning, me asking him to resign. So it was not a surprise that he resigned. It was a surprise that it took him so long to resign. And then I would say the surprise was that Jack resigned. And yes, we knew his house was on the market. We knew he has 2 other houses. We knew he was leaving town at some point, but that was the surprise. His resignation was the surprise. I don't think John's was, but it left us in a situation. And remember, John continued to serve even though he had tendered his verbal resignation and then invoked the rule of necessity. So,
For 3 days, something like that.
And then left us with 1 select board member, where we got through it. We got through it, and I do credit Mr. Cheeseman and Mr. Younger. They really steered the ship until we could find a crew to take the helm. Go ahead, Roger.
So I'm going to make 2 points. One is that the town has at least taken 1 step to mitigate some of the ill effects being discussed by putting a recall provision into the town bylaws. That's 1 point. Second point is that, this circumstance could theoretically happen on a 5-member select board. It's probably mitigated, but it could happen. You could have 3 members, as opposed to 2. I say that not to, impart view one way or the other, but just to point out, some things about what's being discussed.
3 people could be in a car accident. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can happen that we can't necessarily plan against or plan for.
One point that Mike, you brought up was the OML. So with the OML, 2 select board members, running into each other in Crosby's is a quorum and should really be avoided, because any issue that could come before the town, come before the select board, cannot be discussed by a quorum of members. If we were to have a 5-member board, 2 can go grab a beer, go get coffee, visit each other without breaking the OML. Again, should not deliberate. But again, a 2-member committee, two members getting together is not a quorum. So it is not in violation of the OML.
Right, but in a 3-person panel, 2 of them can get together for a beer. They can't talk about town business. You have to have certain confidence that they've read the rules. as opposed to just at the get-go impugning them because it's a 3-person board and they had a beer at Black Cow together. All 3 of them can have a beer as far as I'm concerned, but they better damn well talk about the Red Sox and not the agenda item 3.
So I know.
Now,
then
why-
again-
there's another problem with what you're saying. 2 members of a 5-man board can go out to the cow and can discuss an issue. And in their own minds, well, I know what he thinks, or he knows what I think, and effectively make decisions before they come back to the 5-man board.
Oh, yeah, and and you
Go ahead,
also
Mike.
you do that also with the 3rd person the next day for a beer.
Yep, exactly.
And by the time the week's over, you've lobbied all 4 of them.
Yeah, the purpose of the open meeting law is for the debate to take place where the people can observe it and see what the pros and cons on either side. Obviously, what Mike just said can happen, and I know it happens in a 5-person board. It's a chain,
Yep.
a series of varying 2-person non-public meetings. So then you come in and have a vote, and they simply vote. They never explain why they vote, and there it comes out. Conversely, there are people, and Michelle Bailey, bless her heart, was when I was still active. She then at least felt very strongly that every discussion should be in the televised and public meeting, which is why she was constantly on us about open meeting law problems. And so that if you want everything up front to be seen, then Mike's point is correct. Then you want the 3-member board because it means that all the deliberations are public. In the other case, you have to balance the fact that people can work it out behind the scenes with the value of them being able to work it out behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Roger?
So on this, I'll note that Wenham, of course, has several other boards and committees that are more than 3 members. It's a little bit different because they are not boards or committees of general business, and therefore you don't have the same issue that you do with the select board, that any matter of town business could potentially come before the select board, whereas the planning board, for example, not every matter of town business is a matter that comes before the planning board. But I will note that the town has several boards and committees that have more than 3 members, and they operate within the confines of the open meeting law, or at least theoretically and hopefully.
Yeah.
Right, Deirdre.
So those serial conversations that people were just describing is actually prohibited, right, by the open meeting law. So whether it's 3 or whether it's 5, serial conversations are not allowed if you're following the OML. The argument that it is more transparent with 3 people, I think falls flat. And I say that having watched our prior select board, many meetings over the course of 2020, where there was very limited discussion, where at least 2 members seemed to be constantly in lockstep, despite the fact that there was very little public discussion of anything, particularly appointments. There was no discussion of people's credentials, of why they should be on the board or not be on the particular board. I think there was a tremendous lack of transparency among 3 members. And so I do not find that to be a compelling or valid argument that 5 would be less transparent. I actually
Why would
think
there be more discussion on a 5-man board than on a 3-man board?
because you would have a greater diversity of thought and a greater diversity of ideas and opinions being brought to the table, rather than potentially one strong member who influences a second member, and the third member then has nothing left, nowhere left to go. That is harder to do among 5 people than it is among 3.
I will bring my own case to bear. So I was a member of the Open Space and Rec Committee, and I submitted an application to re-up. And on a 7-member committee, five members were asking to be reappointed, my, Dave Anderson is here, my, Mr. Wilhelm put a hold on my nomination with no reason given, and the three agreed that I was not to be seated. There was no discussion that I had been seated, I had been there for a year prior, and they left an open seat rather than seating me. And that was, it was due to the fact that I spoke out at a June meeting about getting a town meeting scheduled and on the books so that we could get a budget passed. I do believe that was in retaliation, and there was no discussion. Anytime you're going to leave an open seat and you have an applicant, there should be a discussion on why you're not going to seat this applicant, and it should be in an open meeting. It was never addressed. So that was my own experience with the appointment process. And I know of other similar cases with the CPC.
I guess what, and without getting, I know what you're talking about, Patrick, but I think that you're denying the right of the Board of Selectmen to make these decisions. And I know some other decisions that they made just recently with a completely different board that I was against. They make their choices. We elect them to manage the town, and they populate the boards for which they that are not elected, the appointed boards, with their best judgment. And do they really want them to say, I know we have these vacancies and we have candidates that we think are inappropriate? You really want them to go through that in public?
As an applicant, yes, I wanted to know why I wasn't going to be seated. I tuned into the meeting.
And why do you think that a board of 5 would give you that information any more than a board of 3?
Because I would hope that that at least one person would step up and say, no, I want to know why we're not seating this person. Either I don't know them or I do know them. And why are we not even discussing why are we not seating this person? I would hope in a board of 3 that someone would say that, but it didn't happen. And I would think you have a greater chance in a board of 5 of someone raising their hand saying, let's talk about this. Why are we doing this? And I think with 5 members, I hope one person would step up and say, we need to explain why we're doing this.
Even if the explanation turned out to be very unpleasant.
I was there waiting for it. I wanted to know why I wasn't seated. I was never told.
So your point is that it's much more, or can be much more difficult to put a cabal of negativity together, some little, OPEC cartel among the 5. I'm sorry, it's easier to do that with only 3 versus 5. You have more chance of somebody being truly independent, or a couple of people.
Yes.
That's your point. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Kirsten?
Yeah, so we moved from Hamilton to Wenham 6 years ago. And I would say during this time, I did join boards. I've been on committees the whole time. I think we've had a really dysfunctional government. We have not been able to hold on to a town administrator. I think that a lot of that has to do with insiders being the select board. And we have a lot of power placed in the select board. There hasn't been a ton of turnover. And I do think that having a more diverse group of people on the select board would make it more functional, and a more functional town government makes people want to join it and participate. In this last election, a lot of people ran. People don't want to run if it's dysfunctional. So I think anything we can do to improve it, and I think I really appreciate Deirdre's comments, because you're right, there was a lot of dysfunction before those resignations that led up to them. and they were not being addressed. Policies were being made that were completely inappropriate for the people who are voting on them to be making, and ineffective. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of us have spent a lot of time trying to fix that. A lot of us are here in this meeting and on this committee trying to fix these things. We worked on a recall provision. There was pressure put on those 2 select board members to resign. And it was really disheartening to find that we didn't have a recall provision. We had no way to deal with that kind of a situation. And to me, having 5 people really makes it much less likely to happen in the future. Thank you.
Roger?
So I'll offer a couple of thoughts. One, on the issue of the town administrator, I think there are a number of factors why Wenham may struggle to retain town administrators that all necessarily linked to the size of the select board. Paul has discussed the history here at length during our meetings, and the issue with the powers vested in that role being A, undefined, and B, de facto very small or minimal powers is probably contributing to that. It may, no offense to Ryan, you're doing a great, able job and we're happy to help you, but I don't know if Wenham Town Administrator is a big bright lights job within the town administrator industry.
Right.
Second thought is with respect to the elections, and I don't know which way this cuts, but it was really surprising that we had 2 select board elections this year. For one of them, a special election for a 1-year term, we had 3 candidates, a very competitive race for Wenham standards. I had gone back 10 years and did not find a single instance of having 3 candidates for a seat. So that was remarkable in a good way. But then we had a regular term election that saw one candidate unopposed, and I don't know what to make of that, but it's an interesting thought or an interesting fact that the committee should be mulling over, I think. And then the last thought I'll offer at this point is, and this is why, despite the fact that I abstained in the straw poll from voting 3 or 5. I did vote for the issue to go to town meeting. Is to Kirsten's point, we put these issues of potential change to the town at town meeting so that the town can decide whether to add a recall to our town bylaws when it's discovered that one doesn't exist and there might have been need for it for a particular circumstance. I think the same is true with the issue of what the size of our select board should be going forward. That is an issue that should be put to the town so that people can, express their views through the vote.
I might comment on your comments about town administrators. I've been on several of the screening committees, and the first thing that happens is that the headhunter firm interviews us. And when MRI interviewed us a few years back, they commented how the pool of people willing to become town administrators is quite small these days for a variety of reasons. And the second problem here in Wenham is that we don't pay a competitive amount. If you look at the MMA postings and you see what other towns, we had an excellent candidate 5 or 6 years ago who took a job in, I believe it was considering a job in North Andover for maybe 50,000 more than we were paying. This is, once again, this is not a long-term position. This is perhaps an entry level, maybe not, maybe a middle term career position, but we are going to have, Ryan, much as we like you very much now, Ryan, I'm sure the day will come when you will move on to a bigger and better community, because Wenham is little. Look at the fact we just got divided up by the legislature. We're a very small, minuscule little community. We're not a prize, maybe the way we might like to think we are. So that's my thought on town administrators, but we're lucky to have Ryan. We're grateful he's here.
I will say that we are known as a low-paying community, but by our last budget, there was only a $10,000 difference between Wenham's town administrator and Hamilton's town manager. You know, it's not a great difference in money. In authority and roles and responsibilities, yes, there is a difference there. But and I think we've done a study on pay. I have not seen it.
Deirdre, I want to compliment you on your statement about the conflict in the last year and so forth. Needless to say, I was living in Maine when this happened, and this is a case of my being somewhat out of touch with the last year of turmoil. So I can't really speak to that. I can say, and I was a friend of Jack and John for decades, okay, and I like them fine personally. I had my difficulties with Jack. I didn't really have much difficulties with John, but it was also pretty clear to me for quite a while that they were sort of past their useful life on the board. There's a statement made sometimes that, you know, more than 2 terms, you should, everything good you can contribute to town, you should do in the first term or 2 terms that you're there, and they should stand aside, some new blood come in. And the reason they kept being elected and running, I was told, for 10 years, largely unopposed. The only contested race was when Jack got into it to knock Molly Martins out. And so I think the problem of having people who were tired and careless and whatever else you want to say about them is that no one stood up to run against them. And I think it could have been relatively easy in either case to set up a pretty convincing campaign. So just to say it, I think it's the quality of the candidates. It's the new candidates stepping up when the time comes for there to be rollover. And the real issue is this whole feeder thing and to some degree, the difference between Harriet's view expressed earlier that people should work their way up so they know what's actually going on in the town versus people coming in from left field or single issue select board members and that sort of thing. I think that I think personally, I'm fine with 5 if you invest the town administrator with actual power to run the town on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that was the outcome of the 2012 Town Government Study Committee. They just hadn't chose to do it. They didn't choose to do it largely because Jack didn't want it.
I just want to say on the last election, I do know there were other people interested in running in that position, but nobody was crazy enough to run against Diane Bucco, the outgoing town clerk, who's incredibly popular and well-known in town. So I'm not surprised that she ran unopposed.
Somebody else had taken out papers. He did not return them. And he had been on the ZBA. So he was a qualified person. I think that he almost didn't want to go back to the ZBA at one point because he said he didn't have time. So I can't speak for why he withdrew his or never refiled his papers. But politics is, you know, it's a little messy and you do have to run against people.
Right, but if you think
I
that
don't know how
person's going to do
we're
a
ever gonna
good
get-
job, then you might not want to run against them. I think that's
Yeah,
part
I
of
don't know
it.
how we're ever going to find enough qualified people to staff a 5-man board year in and year out.
Well, we did have a lot of people who are on current boards and committees who did say that they would be interested in running. So,
Many people that I've talked to, and I've gotten this from quite a few people, there are many qualified, experienced businessmen in Wenham who have done wonderful jobs with their own companies and have made a lot of money, recognize the town needs help, but don't have the time to devote to the town and have the funds to pay the increases in taxes. So I think another thing we have to do if we go to 5 is make the job more appealing. And I don't quite know how we should do that, but one of the problems we have now is because we don't have a dedicated person like Lucy Farquharson, who used to sit at every meeting and write a column in the Chronicle every week about what went on. Nobody knows what's going on. People call me all the time. And that's part of the reason I like to sign on to various meetings. So I can tell people, we need to improve communication in town.
I will say, as far as the increased cost, it's not necessary. We could decrease our cost by making this a pro bono position. And I personally truly believe it should be pro bono. I would eliminate stipends. But the stipends are set by the select board and approved by town meeting. So there's no necessary cost increase to going to 5. There could be a
Right.
cost decrease, and the $11,500 that we currently pay our select board could be used for other things.
I know, but that's a drop in the bucket. That's no reason to make a decision on our budget for $11,000.
But you just cited a cost increase. It could be a
No,
cost
a
decrease.
tax increase. I'm sorry, I meant a tax increase.
Well, a
people-
cost
What
increase
I'm
is a
saying
tax
is,
increase.
good quality people would like to serve. They don't have the time. They feel guilty. They'd like to offer their services, but they say, I don't want to do it, can't do it. I'll just pay the increased taxes, because a lot of businessmen feel that the town could be operated more economically than it is.
Well,
But-
so the tax issue, we only have, at our current rate, we only have 5 or 6 years until we are capped out.
I
Until-
know.
Until we're at 2.5%. We are at 204 right now. And with the current rate of increase, in 5 or 6 years, we're done. So I don't know where, we could decrease our taxes by eliminating stipends.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's a lot
we-
more.
And we could, so when you say, I'll just pay the increased taxes, we don't have any room to increase our taxes, or very little room.
We're approaching the $25 tax rate too.
Yes, well, that's a 2.5%. That's 25 per thousand is 2.5%.
Right, but that 25, which the real estate brokers keep complaining about, but that isn't this committee's worry. We're talking about the possibility of getting more people to sit on a 5-man board.
But the finances always comes up, and the finances are not fixed. The finances can be whatever the select board suggests and gets approved at town meeting. So it's not, to increase the board to 5 does not increase our cost. It increases our potential liability if we.
No,
don't
I was addressing in terms of getting quality people to serve on the board and be willing to run a campaign.
I'd like to address that because I think the pandemic has dramatically changed who's available to serve on boards and committees, and including the select board, both men and women who are now working from home. Zoom has also dramatically changed who can be involved in meetings, who can attend meetings. We have seen an enormous increase in people attending meetings they care about in this town online. Whether it's select board meetings where there's something contentious going on, or school committee meetings. I know there's one tonight that's happening. So that, the days of having to go to town hall to go to a meeting, and very, very few people ever came, most people didn't watch it on HW Cam later. Those days are over, and I think they're probably gone for good. So we have an enormous number of people who are now not commuting into Boston and are permanently working from home. As we heard in the public forum, that it's actually really exciting, and are serving on boards and committees who were not able to before. And I count myself as one of them.
Kirsten, I'll just point out, or who are commuting into Boston, but can nevertheless attend a meeting while,
Because it's on Zoom.
like
right.
myself right now.
exactly.
Patrick, just in the interest of time, I'm noting that we're at 8:36 and we have a couple of agenda items left. Obviously, these deliberations are going to continue for a couple more meetings. Might we move on to the rest of the agenda, including a discussion of how we craft these deliberations going forward? And I'll now turn over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Anderson.
I'm sorry I'm late. I was at a public hearing on the planning board that I couldn't miss, which was tough because this was a really important meeting too. And I don't have the benefit of the first 75 minutes of what you all discussed. And I regret that. I'll probably watch the recording of it to see what led up to this. I do think from a lot of this has to be anecdotal and sterilized because we don't actually want to talk about names in the community, but I do think that there are a lot of people who are waiting in the wings to join positions in town government. And I think that there are people who, not me, but others who are interested in getting onto the select board. I think one of the benefits of one of the impediments to joining town government, in addition to the time commitment, is the perception that it's an insider's game, that it's a closed network of people. And if you haven't been a part of this community and you don't know certain names and nicknames, you're not part of the governing class. And that may seem dramatic, but as a newer town resident, if it hadn't been for inclusionary things like Jackie Bresnahan's Citizens Town Academy and other things, I probably would have just resisted the concept of participating in town government. It would have been overwhelming. My family wasn't born on Main Street. There are many that have. I think one of the ways that we combat that is increase the amount of participation. If we have a staggered 5-member board, what's the risk? You get a single member, a single issue member, you get a new person on the board, it's staggered. That is a risk that I'm willing to take to be more inclusive and bring more perspectives to the table. I will also say, serving on an elected 5-member board, it is really nice to have 4 other members, particularly as my board confronts critical issues for this town. We're going to hit $25. We can decrease revenue. We can increase tax revenue through commercial districts. These are things that we need. Tom Younger on his way out, what are you going to do with Gordon College if it ceases to be a college? Tax revenue, the master plan is what I'm trying to say. There are some big kind of existential items that are facing this town. We need more people involved. It can't just be 3 people by the skin of their teeth dragging this town forward in an irreconcilable dispute between the schools and preventing hitting $25 per $1,000. That question is done. That time has ended. It's time for new ideas. We need more seats at the table. We need more perspectives. And given a staggered board, it's an opportunity. Maybe not every person that hits that board will be have the right credentials, but you know what? They might have the right ideas or they might not, and they can get elected off. That to me is inspiring, and it is how I see the path forward to solving, again, the existential questions that this town, I think, really faces. Thank you.
Roger?
To just to build on what Dave was saying, we had 3 people interested in joining the FinCom this year. 2 of them were relatively new residents, people who had moved to town within the last decade. All 3 of those applicants had never served on a board or committee of the level of FinCom or select board. I think that demonstrates there are people who are looking to get more involved in the town government, try to find ways in. I agree that Citizens Leadership Academy is a great way of doing that. I was sad to see that had to get put off because of Jackie's transition out of town, but hopefully it's something that we can, get going in the spring. And Ryan, I will say, as town moderator, if you need me to help with that, I will try to, help in any way I can to get that back up and running. I know we'll be going into ATM, time, but I was also looking forward to having a dry run on a mock town meeting. So I think that's a great way to increase visibility and accessibility. We should be thinking of, as a committee and as a town, of any way we can increase visibility and accessibility to the town government, whether it's through expanding the select board or otherwise.
Deirdre?
Yeah, just to add to those last 2 comments a little bit, I think we are still a democracy in this country, and I think more representation and more voices, not to the point where it becomes unwieldy and unworkable, but more representation and more voices is always better than less. And I want to particularly amplify what Dave was talking about, because I think there are existential questions for the town, but I also think as a society, we are facing problems of complexity at levels of complexity that we have yet to have faced in human history. And that may sound dramatic, but climate change is coming. Pandemics, this is not the only one that our kids are likely to see in their lifetimes. These things are escalating, and we need to focus on building resiliency and how the town continues to be healthy in all ways, fiscally, literally healthy, how we become more diverse and inclusive, to grapple with all of these really big questions. And I think, as Dave said, 3 people by the skin of their teeth are not going to do this. We need more people at the table. We need every idea that we can generate, because the future is going to be difficult. It's complex and it's difficult, and we all need to be there at the table.
All right. In the interest of time, thank you, everyone. Good conversation. I don't know if it's a time to decide on the format of the final report. I do believe that it's shaping up that we're going to have a majority and a minority opinion, both to be presented. My gut is there'll be a preamble, which, since I initiated the citizens petition, I feel like that might be where my input is most useful. Roger?
I'm also as likely to abstain on the substantive vote. I'm happy to lend my voice to a preamble or procedural thoughts, whatever that might, however I can be of use in that capacity.
And I do view the preamble as factual, just factual. Keep opinions out and lead to the majority and minority reports. Kirsten?
I just wanted to say that we lost Mike, so I was
Yeah,
we
a
lost-
while
he
ago.
dropped off a
missing
while
his,
ago.
missing his voice in this, so.
Yes. Deirdre, you have something?
Well, I was just gonna say, we need a method section as well to describe, or at least just summarize, the data that we collected, the research, how we did it, so that people understand our process. And I'm not sure how we would go about this with OML and so forth, but it does sound like we're going to have majority, minority opinions. And I think the people who are, taking each side need to have the lead in constructing those arguments.
So I'm gonna offer a thought on that, on process here, Patrick, if I may.
Please.
I think we should probably operate much like a appellate court would, where if you have two sides, each side designates an author who is responsible for preparing a draft of their side's report. Under OML, then those reports would be shared and commented upon at an open meeting, and then put into, along with any neutral introduction, methodology background, and then that would all be assembled. So I don't know, we need to do that tonight. I believe we are having a meeting next week. I think we could do that next week, where Harriet and Mike decide between the two of them who's going to draft the minority report. The four of you, Patrick, Deirdre, Kirsten, and Dave, decide who's going to draft the majority report. And we all as a committee decide who's going to draft any other pieces of the report. And then we go back, do our drafting, and then at the subsequent meeting, start presenting those drafts. And we can continue deliberating through that process, much like an appellate court would. Opinions can change. People could move from one side of the vote to the other as the drafting process goes. But we've set a early December deadline for a full draft report. Yeah, so we do need to get a move on in that sense.
It occurs to me that as a past proponent of pros and cons, I'm now in favor of two opposing pros lists. The majority arguments, however many, 110, however many they are, the opposing ones, and Mike read you his working draft of that. I think before that should be the objective statement of the facts about it. And the preamble, Patrick, I think you're certainly entitled to do a preamble that talks about why, how the issue came up and became important to you. But I think if there's a block of information that's balanced and even and is not one thing or the other, but just the facts against which, then the pro arguments for 5 can be listed and the pro arguments for 3 can be listed. And that's really all that that needs to be sent to the people, I think. Now that becomes fairly simple, because those lists are, the pro lists are going to be a page or two, perhaps, can be written fairly concisely, I think, by and large. And I'm not sure that the factual statement, when it's boiled down to its essentials, is all that lengthy either. So, anyway, that's a thought about how to facilitate patching it all together.
I'm not sure if just lists are enough, but again, something we can discuss going forward. If no one objects, I would love to start just the factual piece, just to kind of get something under our belt and moving. Kirsten?
It just occurred to me that a lot of what was in the public forum presentation, we all agreed on and could go directly into this report as well.
Yep.
Pretty easily, with more of the narrative that was spoken during the meeting, but even using same images and graphs and stuff, which might speed things up.
Yep. Absolutely. Good. So let's talk just briefly about our next meeting, which is on Wednesday. It is not on Thursday. Thursday is Veterans Day. We're meeting Wednesday at 7 p.m., which is the
10th.
So agenda, do we want, so again, the straw poll we took is non-binding. Anyone, of course, is free to change their vote, change their opinion. No one's locked into anything. But I think next week, as Roger said, if the majority selects an author, same with the minority, I think that would be productive next week. And I may be able to have at least the bones of the preamble and maybe the data collection method by next week, if that makes sense to everyone. And I don't think we need too much else on the agenda. Anyone have anything else that should be added?
Sorry, continued deliberations would be on the agenda as well.
Yes.
I don't know if we would have an official update on the retirement and health insurance question. But at some point, we should circle back to that.
Yep. Yes, definitely. Okay. Anything else? Any additional business that people would like to discuss?
I just want to compliment every member of the committee for the quality of the last debate. It was terrific.
And no swearing.
Damn it.
No one turned their video off to make funny faces at anyone else.
One more shameless plug.
Hello, hello, Ryan.
Sorry. I'm sorry, no.
That was you.
No voting member.
One more
Busted,
shameless
Ryan.
plug. One more shameless plug for the generals. Boys soccer tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Girls soccer Sunday at 2 o'clock. No, excuse me, 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock for the boys, 1 o'clock for the girls. Come by, cheer on the generals. Forget the
And
paper.
special election November 30th. The other general.
Yes, absolutely. And it's Jamie Belcito versus who?
No,
Snow,
Mr. Snow from Rowley.
select board member there.
How close was that? I didn't see final number on the Republican side. Was it close or not close?
It was a lot closer than on the Democrat side. I can
No.
send you numbers if you want.
I'll do a Google search. Yeah. It was very close in one of the communities. I know everyone wants to go, but I was surprised by that.
And Dave, I just want to tell you, I met your neighbor last week, Dean Peterson, and really enjoyed spending some time with him.
I could not ask for a better neighbor than Dean and Jane Peterson. They
Oh,
are
they are fabulous.
Wenham treasures.
Yes.
They're universal treasures.
Some great stories to tell. But entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And seconded.
Excellent. Harriet.
Yes.
Roger.
Yes.
Kirsten.
Yes.
Deirdre.
Yes.
Dave?
Aye.
Aye, and I'm an aye as well. Thank you all, folks. Great meeting. Thank you very much.
See you
Thanks,
next
Paul,
week.
Ryan, and
Good night.
Catherine, and other Catherine for being here too.
Yes, thank you very much, Ryan and Catherine and Paul. Go Generals.
Bye-bye.
Good night.